things like cars that need to operate when it's really hot and when it's really cold.
It's the new frontier of battery engineering to make it so that batteries are happier at multiple temperatures.
And Steingart expects there will be a lot of progress on this front in the next 10 years. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
Our executive producer is Kelly Silvera. Our digital producer is Dylan Mietinen. Our engineers are Jessen Dueller and Becca Weinman. And in New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
ViStar Credit Union and 121 Financial Credit Union, two of Jacksonville's credit unions, are now coming together, all to better serve our members and give back to Jacksonville, the city we call home. Learn more at ViStar121merger.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
It's the biggest stories of the week. Legislators push to ban Pride and Black Lives Matter flags in public buildings. The City Council continues to raise questions about the legality of removing Springfield's Confederate monument. The family of a man wrongfully convicted for more than 40 years mourns his death after just 5 years of freedom. A cold case triple homicide is the focus of a community appeal by law enforcement. And the corruption trial against 2 ousted JEA executives moves ahead, but with separate juries. I'm Ann Schindler, and that's all ahead this hour on our First Coast Connect Week in Review. Then, local music aficionado Hurley Winkler gives us the scoop on her Saturday evening radio program, The Jax Music.
It is 1 minute after 9 o'clock. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Attorney General Ashley Moody is warning Floridians about a rise in deaths from a dangerous designer drug, often referred to as fake Xanax.
There's been a rapid and drastic increase in toxology cases involving bromazolam. It's a potent benzodiazepine.
In a video warning about the drug, Moody says the side effects include loss of coordination, drowsiness, and respiratory depression.
It's imperative that Floridians understand how dangerous this street drug really is, especially when mixed with illicit fentanyl, which is the #1 killer of Americans aged 18 to 45.
And Moody says bromazolam was present in only 1% of toxicology cases in 2021. That jumped to 13% of cases by mid-2022. Jacksonville has a new director of neighborhoods, Thomas B. Waters, who was appointed to the job by Mayor Donna Deegan, will be responsible for neighborhood and housing services, as well as regulatory compliance for the city. He'll also manage all neighborhoods department operations, including housing and community development, municipal code compliance, and animal care and protective services. Waters starts his new job on Monday. And this weekend, only one lane of the Matthews Bridge is scheduled to be open as part of a bridge rehabilitation project. The Florida Department of Transportation says both westbound lanes will close tonight at 9 p.m. The lanes are then set to reopen by 6 on Monday. We have an overcast sky at 53 degrees here in downtown Jacksonville, 20% chance of rain this morning, then partly sunny and windy this afternoon, upper 60s today.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Opinions expressed on the First Coast Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not necessarily reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and you're listening to First Coast Connect. It's Friday, so that means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, a push to ban Pride and Black Lives Matter flags gains traction in Tallahassee. controversy continues to grow over a legal opinion allowing the removal of Springfield's Confederate monument. A man exonerated after 4 decades in prison dies after just 5 years of freedom. Police ask for the community's help solving the cold case murder of a 10-month-old, and 2 former JEA executives will be tried jointly at their corruption trial, but with separate juries. Then later, the irrepressible Hurley Winkler. We talked to the Northeast Florida native about her new Saturday night radio show, The Jax Music Hour. But first, a look at the week of headlines. I'm joined now by David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Hey, David.
Good morning, Ann.
Lynn Jones-Turpin, associate editor for the Florida Free Press. Welcome.
Yes, the Jacksonville Free Press. Good morning.
Jacksonville Free Press. I apologize. I got it wrong in my script here. Katie Jeffries, morning anchor at First Coast News. Welcome.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
And Stephen Ponson, that's a voice you'll know well as the reporter with WJCT News 89.9. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, how are you doing, Ann?
Good. Thanks for being here. And we invite you to join the conversation as well. Give us a call at 549-2937. Email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or tag us on X at FCC On Air. You can also watch the program live streamed right now on Facebook or the WJCT YouTube page. So we start today with a proposal to ban Pride and Black Lives Matter flags entirely from public properties. That would include schools, college campuses, city hall flagpoles. It would even prevent teachers from wearing lapel pins. Lynn Jones-Turpin, this bill advanced on a party line vote backed by the Republican majority in the State House and the Senate. It's already, though, generating national and even international headlines for Florida once again.
Yes, it is. And over at the Jacksonville Free Press, we were, the paper we had for the diversity and equity through the state of Florida, we lost a big account due to that. After 10 years, they stated that our newspaper was explicit and controversial. So I can't really speak to the fact that the diversity and equity, as far as being, what do they call it, affirmative action at the same time, is going away because we have had it for a long time. So you do have to say, well, maybe the bottom line is whoever gets the job gets the job. We can't say we have to have so many, a percentage of this and a percentage of that. And I think that's where it is going to.
Katie, according to the bill's sponsor, Republican State Rep David Barrero, children are being, quote, subliminally indoctrinated and radicalized by these flags. It's also something that he's linking to Marxism, transgender ideology, and critical race theory. This would seem to be continuing to kind of put Florida at ground zero for the culture wars.
Yeah, and it's something that, is not too surprising considering that we have seen with kind of the agenda coming from the Ron DeSantis organization, what he kind of campaigned on. But also, I know that they replaced the Principles of Sociology course with an American History course. And one of the things that we were trying to look at this week was what exactly does that change with the teachings? So what's going to be taught to students? And I think that's one of the questions a lot of parents have with this change to the education. What are the students going to be learning in class about American history now?
Right. And David, so this does come right on the heels of, as Katie mentioned, the Department of Education coming out with a permanent ban on any diversity, equity, or inclusion element in instruction.
It's really jarring because colleges are placed to be a place where there's a free exchange of ideas, and the idea of if you don't like speech, you counteract it with more speech. It's really a chilling effect, and I don't even understand what that means. Subliminally indoctrinated. I don't know what that means. That means that somehow there's like some sort of mind meld happening on college campuses, and students at that age are not able to think, absorb, make up their own minds. It sort of feels like, in my view, like it's kind of infantilizing college students who really should be exposed to different ideas, and they can accept them, reject them, and it should be a marketplace of ideas on a college campus.
Stephen, when you're talking about removing symbols that, represent, freedom, liberation, or ideas of that for entire communities, how does it impact the communities themselves? People who are stating and saying Black Lives Matter, or, there should be equality for all people, regardless of sexual identity or gender identity.
Well, it's definitely one of those things where it can show and give the wrong impression for those communities where, you know, they want to be represented, they want to be out there, they want people to know who they are and have their stories told, and it could really just kind of, unfortunately, sweep them under the rug, or maybe, you know, have them not in the proper lighting, so to speak, that they may be in. And that's one of the things that kind of struck me about the flag banning bill, was that it would also remove and also basically make it so that way teachers couldn't wear lapel pins that say Black Lives Matter or a rainbow flag or anything like that. So it takes away a little bit of that individualism that teachers might have to express themselves within a classroom and maybe not necessarily indoctrinate children like we've heard so many Republicans say over the course of the last couple of years, but just, you know, have it be an expression for the teachers themselves and for other people that may feel a lot of pride with where they are and where they've come from.
And Lynn, this is a continuation of what we've seen in recent years at the public school level, of course. I know that, you know, we saw it when Duval County, under pressure or perceived pressure from the state, you know, removed pride flags from classrooms, asked teachers to take down Black Lives Matter flags. What message does that send to students, especially when you're talking about students in, you know, predominantly neighborhoods of color, people of color, or have a predominantly Black population in those schools?
Well, as an African American, I mean, first it has to start in the home. Number one, we have to teach our children African American history ourselves at the same time. We cannot depend on the school system. Maybe back when we were in school, the books had certain, you know, amount of information. And even now, I do not think that there's that much information in the books in school that literally teaches African American history to that extent. Okay, and then with Black Lives Matter, the flags, the banning pride, well, where do we balance that at the same time? Because you got a banning the Black Lives Matter, a pride flag. So now one person has on a pride flag, one person has on Black Lives Matter. So how do you intertwine those two at the same time? But yet we have an American flag. You want to have that individuality, but at the same time, I don't think it's mixing. And within our community, there's a lot of emphasis on this, but again, we have to take control of this in our own communities.
Ed from Orange Park, I think, has a question about the different types of flags. Ed, good morning. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. I'm kind of surprised that nobody has mentioned that the same rules or law says that you cannot fly the MAGA flag or pro-life or pro-Second Amendment, or even, I think, even the blue flag associated with the pro-police. It's very fair, the law. It doesn't just say LGBT and BLM. It has basically limits everybody else also, which is fair. That's all.
That's a good point. Thank you, Ed, for that. And there are just a couple of carve-outs in this law that include the American flag, and there's a few others that are carved.
I know that it said that it would outlaw flags that depict racial, sexual orientation, gender, or public ideology.
Yeah, and so it's the ones that are accepted from this are the Florida state flag, the POW MIA flag, the firefighter memorial flag, and the U.S. flag, David.
But shouldn't those flags be presented per their organization, instead of having to present those to say, like you were saying about the teachers that have on their individual Black Lives Matter or they support? So shouldn't you come to work and not have to support anything? That should be personal. I think it should be personal. That's just my opinion.
You think that people shouldn't be wearing flags to work regardless?
I say that. I mean, it's a support, but it shouldn't be so overwhelming. We're overwhelmed with all of this. We're overwhelmed with the DEI. We're overwhelmed with the flags. I mean, and again, the gentleman just talked about the American flag. So where does that come in?
Interesting. So, David, you've been a reporter for a long time. This comes now on the heels of also some seemingly very politicized statements by the Department of Health. So that's another agency, the Department of Education, where we're seeing positions that maybe are less aligned with the organization's original sort of stated mission, and maybe a little bit more angled at placing politics at the center of the conversation. And I'm thinking about the health department's statement, disavowing vaccines again.
Right.
Latipo has been kind of out there very much advocating against, it's suggesting that they're, dangerous.
Yeah, Florida, in the recent years, Florida has without a doubt been on the vanguard of pushing the envelope on these issues, public health in terms of the vaccines, certainly in terms of the, quote, woke ideology, and especially at the campus level. I mean, you had the new college, completely converted from one academic model to another academic model down in Southwest Florida. So it's been a, quote, laboratory for a lot of these ideas. Not sure how popular they are nationally. We've certainly seen with a presidential campaign of Governor Ron DeSantis that even within the Republican Party, there's been limits to how that sort of Florida model has translated and as being sort of a national model. But yes, there's no doubt that that's been happening, and I don't know that there's been a real pushback yet. It's a Republican-controlled legislature. So whether this will get through or not, I don't know. And to the caller's point about it being other flags as well. I mean, I'd get back to the idea if I were a college student, I walked down a college dorm and I saw a police blue flag on one door, and I saw a Black Lives Matter on the next door, and I saw a pride flag on the next door. That's what college life is about. It's the diversity of opinions. If there's a Nazi flag, no. You draw some lines, yes. I mean, I do think that there are lines to be drawn, but these are all part of the public debate. Let it debate.
We've got a call, Linda from Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Welcome to First Coast Connect.
Good morning. Florida is, sometimes when you have unchecked power, it seems like we go from one extreme to the other. But it really gives the impression that we're back in the 1950s and they think that everything is June and Cleaver, because they're thinking that young people who are expecting to take up the mantle and solve issues are so traumatized they can't figure out, what they want to express themselves for. Yet we can clearly allow them to buy AK-15, with no encumbrance upon their Second Amendment rights. But First Amendment rights, sure, impede those in the state. And I think that is what is being shown to the outside. We are pro-Second Amendment, not pro-First Amendment.
Thanks, Linda. Excuse me. I'm sorry, Linda. I think I hung up on you a little rapidly there. Stephen Ponson, what about that? I mean, the Second Amendment does seem to take primacy in the Sunshine State over the First.
It does, and it's been like that for at least the last couple of years or so. And one of the things that I've always found interesting about Florida is the fact that we have such broad sunshine laws. We've had such openness and transparency. And it really just kind of feels like over the course of the last few years or so that is starting to kind of reverse, and we're starting to go in that different direction. Personally, I think that's part of one of the reasons why you've heard so much about the quote unquote Florida man concept, is because Florida has these broad First Amendment laws that you can get information and report it and put it out there, and it just kind of feels like we're going in that backwards direction from having those broad laws, and we're still, the Second Amendment is absolutely going to be a hot topic and one that is going to be talked about for a long time. But for me personally, I just see the threat of having the First Amendment laws being reversed or I guess kind of curtailed or something along those lines. To me, that's what kind of doesn't necessarily worry me, but it's something to keep an eye on as we go forward.
We got an email from Jim. He's saying, is there a law banning Confederate flags from being on school grounds, or is it illegal to wear a Confederate flag lapel pin? Katie Jeffries, I think that perhaps Confederate flags are not banned by statute. There are probably some rules at the local level, individual school districts, that those would not be acceptable or appropriate. But as David said, it's a broader conversation. There are some lines that should be drawn and perhaps others that should be a little more flexible.
Right. And to my knowledge, I don't know specifically about the rules about Confederate flags or a Confederate flag shirt to be worn in school. But under this new law, would that fall under political ideology and be banned? So I guess that's one of the questions when you look at this is, when you look at flags, what category do they fall under?
And some of that might really be a matter of interpretation.
Right. Interpretation, does that come down to censorship? So, I mean, it's like the old saying, the knife cuts both ways. It's not just going to be, if their goal was to ban pride flags, well then, like the caller said, it's going to be on the other side, too, of political ideology. Those flags would be banned as well.
Curtis on the north side. Good morning, Curtis.
Good morning, team. I just believe that the only flag that should be permitted, and it's up to the companies and schools and whatnot, is the American flag. Outside of that, any other flag, African flag, LGBTQ flags, or whatever, Confederate flags, all of that is idolatry and a belief. That's your personal feeling. In some neighborhoods, you can't even have flags because of the HOAs. So I just think it should be only the American flag should be permitted if you're going to fly a flag or represent any view or feeling with a flag. Outside that, it's on your own personal time, but not in a business. Thank you so much, all school. Thank you so much.
If I could say something.
Thank you, Curtis. Sure, go ahead.
Just being the only African American here today on this panel, when we're talking about flags and the Confederate flags and all of these flags. The bottom line is this: if America really stood on what it was founded on and what we were supposed to be doing as Americans, we wouldn't have this problem. We would not be debating a flag. We would not be debating a Black Lives Matter flag, banning the pride flag. The flag is the flag. So now, as he said, this is something that's personal, number one, and we've made it big time news. As the Steve just said over there, you can go to college and you may have 4 different doors with 4 different options. But the main option, that's the main option that we should be focusing on. But we putting so much emphasis in being Confederate. I'm from Michigan. I'm from Detroit, Michigan. So we grew up a little different. So here they know about I've learned a lot from the African Americans here and the elders here. They grew up with the water fountains and black and white water fountains. My mother's 82 years old and she was in Detroit almost since she was 4. So she didn't know any of that. Even at 82, but an individual here at 82 will give me a different experience. So as a country and as a whole, I don't think we've even taken time to understand what we need and what we're supposed to have, because we're continuing to have these conversations. We're continuing to be separate when in reality, we're all doing good. African Americans are quite prosperous at this time in 2024. We as African Americans don't talk about our prosperity, how far we have come, and no one talks about that. Like I say, our prosperity, what we're doing as a culture, what we have contributed to this country. It's a division. It's like we just continue want to be divided.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm going to move on in a second, but I just want to take Stanley's call from the north side. Good morning, Stanley.
Yes. Hello there, everybody, especially Lynn. I'm with Lynn on half of what she was saying until she got to the end. This country has always been separated. Now, when it comes to being in America, that cover everybody. Now, when it comes to the school, there should be no banners in the school except when it comes to the flag. That should be the only thing. And it's appalling that we have elevated to this level where we have all these different flags within the school. I'm talking about the school only. Thank you.
Thanks, Stanley. So we're going to move on to another big story, somewhat related. The Jacksonville City Council this week continuing to raise questions and concerns about the removal last month of the Confederate statue from Springfield Park. Most of their ire surrounds the legal opinion provided by the new city attorney, the general counsel, justifying that removal. David Bauerlein, I'm going to start with you because this is an issue that you've followed quite closely. What seems to be the main issue that the council members are upset about?
the real main issue is that the statue and is in Springfield Park, which is in the Springfield Historic District, which if you're in a homeowners association, think of it as a homeowners association run by the city. And if you want to do anything within that district, typically you have to go get a certificate of appropriateness from the city saying you want to do X, Y, Z. They sign off on it, and you go get to do it. And so the debate has been whether this particular monument fell under that restriction. And you had one legal memo back in the summer saying, yes, it did. And if the mayor wanted to move the statues out of the monument or the monument itself, she needed to go to the planning department and the Jacksonville Historic Preservation Commission, get a certificate of appropriateness, then you're on your way. Then you had a second view that was by the new general counsel that no, it's not a structure that falls under that requirement, so you don't have to go get a certificate of appropriateness. Then you had another memo that came out more recently this month that basically said, well, yes, it is a structure that is something that you would need to get a certificate of appropriateness on, but only for certain types of changes. There's no debate that that monument looks different now than it did before, but the view is that there's only specific actions that require a certificate of appropriateness, and moving statues out of that monument did not trigger that requirement.
And to kind of get just a little in the weeds there, I think that what they're saying is that if you modified or made an improvement to the park, you would need that permission, but this wouldn't constitute an improvement because they're taking something away. Is that kind of the...
That was one of the arguments, and the other one is things like, that it's not a demolition because the monuments, most of the monuments still there, so it wasn't a demolition. It's not a relocation of a building because it's not a building. So it's very, I don't want to say legal hair splitting, but it's a very hyper intensive look at the law. They actually went back to the legislative history when early 90s to actually pull the actual items that are cited in the ordinance. So, it's kind of like, it's very granular in terms of how it's really applying what the requirements are. And obviously there's been some pushback from council members saying, well, this is the kind of legal opinion you get when someone says, let's figure out what result we want, and then let's figure out a way to get it justified through our legal interpretation.
And Stephen, I think maybe fair to say there seems to be a little bit of legal gymnastics at work here, but some are also saying that this wouldn't even really be a question if it was a different, item, a different monument, or, not this particularly incendiary symbol.
Sure. I mean, you could make that argument for sure. And one of the things that has kind of struck me as interesting about this is all of the back and forth that we've seen recently between the general counsel's office and city council. Well, city council had the funds. They could have gone forward with that process, but they didn't. So the mayor did what she felt like was needed to have happen, and took down that monument in Springfield Park. So that's one of the things that I find very interesting about following David's reporting and following these city council meetings is the back and forth between what the city council is saying and then what the mayor's administration is saying about what's going on and everything like that, and how this process is now playing out.
Lynn, some council members, they're objecting, saying it's not the statue removal that they object to, it's just the process that was used to remove it. What are you hearing from the community about that distinction?
Well, I know if Ben Frazier was here, he'd be quite proud of them dismantling the monument. But here we are again. Now we're talking about a Confederate monument. I mean, come on. We got to get this off of us here. We really have to get this off of us. Again, I'm the only African American here at the table. When can we just say, okay, so what? We changing the name of Jacksonville now?
It has been suggested.
Okay, but then Lem Turner, he was a Confederate general. Okay, so we changing the name of that street too. So we have to understand this is what happened in America. This is how we got to where we're at. But at the same time, maybe we could have used those monuments as a teaching tool also, taking students over there to see this monument. This monument's been there for, I don't know, 80, 90 years. But has anyone really gone over there and take a class over there and say, well, hey, this is why the monument was here? What those ladies raised $125 back then to erect the monument. So Jacksonville, you might as well shut Jacksonville down if we're talking about monuments, flags, DEI. When are we just going to really just understand this is America? It's just that simple. Because we could have just taken these monuments down a long time ago. But at the same time, we're still here discussing, we've gone from Black Lives Matter to the city council. Then 1 minute you want to tear the monument down. The next minute you like to have a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
We've all come, this is 2024. It'll be another 10 years and we'll still be sitting up here talking about monuments. So we got to, when are we going to move on?
And so there is obviously some sense of frustration that this conversation continues, Katie, and yet there have been some significant changes based on the push to kind of undo some of the city's racist monikers, including Forest High School, which was named after a Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. That was only very recent.
Now it's Westside High School.
Right. So there have been some moves to make those changes that have been widely supported and still quite controversial when it comes to the city council or the school district or whoever's in charge of making those changes.
And it's important to remember, I mean, out towards what used to be Hemming Park, of course, they had the Confederate symbol that was taken down there, and that was under Lenny Curry's administration. And that was done, I believe, in 2020 when that occurred. So this issue has been an ongoing issue. It's been a hot button issue. And even then, Lenny Curry said, we're going to take down all of the monuments. And of course, as we all know, like that did not happen. And Donna Deegan, during her campaigning, said she was for taking down the monuments. It's a very hot button issue. It's definitely a talker when you bring up the monuments. I mean, especially everybody in news, you get a lot of comments. You get people with very strong opinions about it. But it has been a continual, ongoing issue that we have covered and we have talked about. And unfortunately, I don't foresee that really changing. Like you said, even people have talked about changing the name of Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm. Call Tom from the West Side. Good morning, Tom.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, most of the city council's arguments against the mayor on this have involved. There's only one that seems to be constant, and I think that's the real reason they're upset, and that's that they weren't notified in advance that this action was going to take place. I think it's really petty. I think the city has bigger issues to deal with. I think they need to get on those, like the bill that's going to take away the JEM money from the city.
Thanks, Tom. David, I just want to touch briefly because your newspaper did a public records request and found that the infighting wasn't just between the council and the city and the city attorney. It's actually happening within the Office of General Counsel among the attorneys themselves.
Right. You always hear the expression, you don't want to see how the sausage is made when you follow like a legislative body. And there's some sausage making that's involved as well, it seems, in how attorneys come up with their opinions. And there's a lot of back and forth and give and take on that. So, I mean, the Supreme Court hears the same case and 4 justices rule one way, 3 the other. I mean, there's nothing sacrosanct about how judges and attorneys reach their opinions. And so that's why a lot of the focus on the city council is to what extent was this opinion based on, a neutral reading of the law as opposed to seeing if there's a way to reach a preconceived notion, which I think they're going to have another meeting on it this Thursday. I'm sure there will be 2 more hours of that. And to some of the callers' points, this city council has spent far more time investigating the process than they ever talked about what they wanted to do about the monument or not.
Well, we're going to move on. I want to talk a little bit about Clifford Williams. He was a man known to friends and family here in Jacksonville as Booney. He died last Thursday at the age of 81. Williams was wrongfully convicted along with his nephew Nathan Myers in 1976. He was initially sentenced to death. Both those men were released in 2019. Katie, this was the first case that was overturned by the state attorney's office's conviction integrity review unit. Why was this case important at the time, and why is it important again?
Well, this case, he was wrongfully imprisoned for 43 years. And when you look at the case, the evidence against him, there really wasn't any. It was a woman who was killed, another woman who was shot, who survived. And the only evidence that they had in their second trial, because the first trial was a mistrial, was just her statements. And then when they went back and investigated it, the woman said that the shooting occurred inside. They found out the shooting actually happened outside, that the statements didn't match up, and that was the only evidence they had. And he had been very adamant in his time, and I know, Ann, you've done stories about this as well, that he was innocent. He was trying to find loopholes to show his innocence. So this, I think, is so important that organizations, that law enforcement or state attorney's office, they can go back and look at convictions and say, you know what, this was wrong. Let's try to correct it. It's been 43 years, but at least we can exonerate him.
And Lynn, it is unusual to have a conviction. I think this was the first time in Florida history where a conviction was reversed based on the work of the prosecutor's office as opposed to something like the Innocence Project.
Okay, well, that was impressive. That means that they're doing their jobs. That means that they're doing it. But at the same time, that's one man. How many we get of those a year? Maybe three innocent individuals that have been in prison, say, more than 40 years. So we still have a lot of work to do, and at the same time, with the prison system, you only can let so many people out. So they're only going to let so many people out per year anyway, because the prison system is making millions and billions of dollars. So if we let everybody out, we can't let 10 people out at a time that are innocent. Only one, maybe two, maybe three a year, give you a good story, and then we move on. So it's about the story to show that, yes, the Innocent Project works, the prosecutors did their job. But can you imagine how many more individuals are in these prisons that are innocent? So if you were able to get 10, 20 out at a time, then you're putting a dent in the system. The next thing you know, now we're shutting down prisons. Now you're talking about jobs. But when you're bringing in so many at the same time, so it being a revolving door, but again, there has to be more of this. It can't just be 1 and 2 and 3 a year.
And Stephen, to her point, I mean, the one of the largest employers across North Florida, generally speaking, is the carceral system, is people who work in corrections and run the prisons.
Right. There's plenty of the state prison that's in I believe it's in I think it's Union County, that's there, and that's part of the greater Northeast Florida community. And yes, there are more and more cases that are out there that people have been trying to show that they are innocent and everything like that, and sometimes they do fall through the cracks, unfortunately, and that's one of the things that is, in my mind, at least a little bit hopeful, that this in this unit that was created back in 2018 by State Attorney Melissa Nelson is starting to look at that process and at least starting to get that process started of looking at potential cases. And in this case, there was the overturn of the conviction. But it's good to at least get that process started because, to Lynn's point, there are a lot more people that are out there that are in prisons, that are in jails, that shouldn't be there. And that's one of the things that we have to correct as a greater society moving forward.
And David, there have been, of course, a lot of exonerations of people based on DNA that had been sentenced to death. Number of death row, probably in the hundreds now, people who've been removed after having, DNA evidence to the contrary of their conviction. And just, I think a week or two ago, the Conviction Integrity Review Unit had another case, Willie Williams, who was had his conviction overturned after decades in prison.
Yeah, the old expression, it's better to have 100 guilty people go free than one innocent person convicted. And there's supposed to be a very high standard in the jury system of beyond a reasonable doubt. But yes, when DNA evidence overturns a conviction, that's pretty rock solid that was not a conviction that should have happened. And these cases it really is heartbreaking when you think about somebody who has lost 40 years of his life. I think after he got out of prison, then he was diagnosed with cancer. So it's just kind of, you just look at it as almost like the book of Job, where it's like, what what have I done to deserve all this? Just a human element of the loss there, and that life is never going to be, regained, all that time lost, and then to finally get out of prison, and he was elderly at that point, but then to only have 5 years as a free person really is heartbreaking and devastating. And the part of it is going back in these cases, but once these cases are decided, it's extremely difficult to reverse a conviction. Even in this case, there were people who thought still the jury got it right. There was a lot of back and forth or controversy with the decision to move forward with the exoneration. A lot of it is on the front end, obviously, making sure that if cases are where you're going to take away somebody's life and liberty, that there's been a high standard applied to that case by the prosecutors, the police, by the jury.
And Katie, the family loss is really one of those things that's just incalculable in cases like this, and not always something that comes into the debate. I spoke earlier this week to Clifford Williams' daughter, Tracy, and she visited her father on death row when she was 4 years old. That was something that every weekend that they would be going to death row. It's almost hard to conceive what a childhood is like when that's that your father is, and he was ultimately that conviction, the death row conviction, was overturned before his conviction was reversed, but he still spent many years on death row.
Yeah, you think about what you took from his family. Like you said, his daughter never got to have those memories, never got to have him be with her while she was growing up. His nephew, who was in jail with him, who was also exonerated, how much life he missed out on, and opportunities and memories. And yes, they were awarded, I think, like $2 million, but that does not make up at all 43 years of your life. And I think what impressed me when we spoke with his nephew this week was he was saying that, Clifford Williams, he was never bitter about it. And I find that very impressive, because I feel like I would be very bitter about losing 43 years of my life. So I think that speaks to his character, that he wasn't bitter. He was glad to be out. He was glad to have the time he did with his family. But it's such a injustice what he lost, what his family lost in those 4 decades.
And Lynn, one of the issues, as David mentioned, he died. He had a cancer diagnosis, but that actually predated his release.
Okay.
And he wasn't maybe getting the treatment in prison that he could have gotten to keep that cancer in check.
You know what I thought about? I used to say, well, individuals that are on death row, they should die. We keep individuals on death row years. But now this gentleman here was 43 years? So it took 43 years, yet he's on death row. So to say that he didn't die on death row, injection, how
well, to be clear, his death row element of his sentence was overturned earlier. So he has just been kind of a life in prison sentence.
Even life in prison, you get released due to this after 43 years. And I used to still say, well, but then here you are. Maybe he shouldn't have been on death row. He's not going to die. So I was kind of leery on that side right there. But at the same time, like you say, he had cancer in prison. This whole prison system, the incarceration of individuals for this long. We Steve over there talked about humanity. When does the humanity come in here? When do we begin to be human to one another? When do we begin to stop all of this racial talk, everything is about, let me tell you something. Everything is about either slavery or white people. And I'm just saying that here today because that seems to be our conversation in America. Okay.
I want to move on to talk about a triple murder and arson cold case. Another headline from this week, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office asking for the public's help solving a 6-year-old triple homicide. Katie, unsolved cold cases are your beat at First Coast News. What can you tell us about the circumstances of this case? They're pretty troubling.
Yeah, this was very tragic. So this happened in December of 2017. Ariane Johnson, Kayshawn Trotter, and then their daughter, 10-month-old Ariel Trotter, were all found dead. This originally came in as a fire call, a house fire along India Avenue, but once firefighters got there, they found the bodies of the 3. And it turns out the 2 adults, Ariane and Kayshawn, they were shot, and tragically, Ariel died of smoke inhalation. This week, the sheriff's office spotlighted this as their cold case spotlight and kind of gave new details, mentioning how Ariel was basically between her two parents, was trying to get to her mother when she collapsed on the floor, and they showed kind of an outline of the little girl's body amongst the soot. And I think that's part of what is so tragic in this case. It's a 10-month-old baby. She couldn't have identified who killed her parents. There was no reason to harm her. They believe that the people that killed her parents set the Christmas tree on fire in an effort to hide evidence. I featured this in one of my cold case stories a couple years ago, and I spoke with the parents of Ariane Johnson and Keyshawn Trotter, and their moms mentioned that there was no forced entry. This was a friend's home that they were at, so they believe that the people who did this knew the parents, knew the family, and so they're begging for people to come forward. I mean, not just for Ariane and Keyshawn Trotter, but for Ariel, who, unfortunately, out of the three, had probably the most agonizing death.
Yeah. And Stephen, the reality is that, nationally, about half of all murders remain unsolved. Big reason for that is because, people who might have information are often afraid of coming forward. Excuse me, because of retaliation that they might experience or fear of that. And that's certainly something we've seen in Jacksonville. We've even seen witnesses who've, had hits put out on them because they were going to testify.
Right. That's one of the things it's got to be one of the things that is one of the bigger hurdles for police and law enforcement officers to have to overcome is that human element, because we talk about DNA evidence and everything like that, and that is ironclad and paints a picture, but you still have to have these eyewitnesses. You still have to have these people to come forward with information, with identifying suspects and everything like that. That's one of the bigger hurdles, is trying to get people to talk, because as we've heard from sheriffs in the past, sometimes getting people to talk and just giving information can be very difficult. There are ways to do so anonymously through Crime Stoppers, and you can also give information and try to remain anonymous whenever you call the sheriff's office. But that's one of the more difficult things within police work, is trying to get someone to talk and trying to get that information. And then sometimes it's making sure that it makes sense, because sometimes people's thoughts can change. They can think about different things. Their story might change a little bit. And that little change might be very crucial to solving a case or not solving a case.
And Lynn, asking for that community participation is sometimes difficult if there is not trust between the community and prosecutors or police.
Well, in our community, what is it? Snitches get stitches. So I can't speak to that, because a lot of people are scared to come forward. A lot of people do not want to be involved in any crime, and they could be right there on the scene. So I'm sure there are a lot of unsolved murders. So a lot of people, I think, just don't like to get involved in the crime stopping. And I don't think crime will ever go away. Crime will always be here in some fashion, shape, or form. But at the same time, I think if people did come forward, but then it's a stigma. Again, if you come forward and then you speak up. So that right there in our community, it's serious.
I want to move on just to the JEA topic, since we are going to discuss it just briefly. There's two JEA former executives. They're going to trial, federal corruption trial. A judge this week, David, said that he's going to allow them to move forward with their case at the same time, but he's going to give them two separate juries. That's kind of unusual.
It is going to be unusual, and there may be some times during the trial itself where one jury will leave the room and the other jury will still be in the room hearing as evidence or testimony. So it's going to be a real challenge, I think, to orchestrate that for the judge. And there's all sorts of weird scenarios that may come out of it. If one jury rules in one way and the other jury rules in the other way, in terms of, because you have two people and on trial for the same charges, but obviously the fact situations might be different in terms of how the juries come up with their verdicts. So it's almost going to be like, you get these big screen TVs with split screens on it. You can have like a split screen jury here where you can have two juries listening to the same case, but then going in and deliberating and possibly coming out with different verdicts.
Katie, it seems like it'll be a logistical nightmare, sort of. I mean, I have seen a trial in the Duval County Courthouse that had, dual juries and two defendants. But prosecutors obviously don't want to try to mount a case this complicated, this costly twice.
That's right. So, and they also mentioned making witnesses come back and testify twice. So it will be kind of a logistical dance of, all right, does this jury have to leave and this jury stays? And it'll be interesting to see what's used by the defense teams, if statements from each during their previous testimony, if that's going to be used. But I've never seen two juries in one trial, so it'll definitely, I think, be an interesting feat for them.
So you saying, let me ask a question on that. So you got two juries, two cases at the same time. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Ann.
No, I was just saying we got to wrap up.
Yep, go right ahead.
All right.
Wrap it on up.
Thanks so much, David Bauerlein, Lynn Jones-Turpin, Stephen Ponson, Katie Jeffries. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back talking to our favorite new DJ, Hurley Winkler.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
Join Mayor Deegan Saturday, January 27th at the Jacksonville Main Library for River City Readers, a citywide literacy challenge for school-age children that will run through 2024. Learn more at jacksonville.gov/River City Readers. Let's get Duval reading.
The president and Republican senators renew efforts to send more aid to Ukraine, but Speaker Johnson digs in.
We have to secure our own border before we talk about doing anything else.
There's new hope for parents as Congress eyes ways to revive the child tax credit, and after an easy win in Iowa, Trump toggles between the campaign trail and trial in the courthouse. More on the roundup next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. Earlier this month, the Jacksonville Music Experience launched a new slate of music programming on Saturday nights on WJCT News 89.9. The evening shows are also simulcast on the Independent 89.9 HD4. A couple weeks ago, we interviewed maestro and DJ Mr. Al Pete about his show, The Neighborhood, and we now welcome JME writer Hurley Winkler, host of the Jax Music Hour. Hey, Hurley.
Thanks for having me, Ann. It's so great to be here.
Oh, it's so great to have you. So this show is really locally focused. Talk a little bit about your connection with Jacksonville and the Jacksonville music scene.
Oh, I could talk about this forever. I was born and raised here in Jacksonville, grew up a very music-loving kid, a big music fan when I was a kid, and got really interested in the local scene when I would read the pages of Folio Weekly, which you at the time, Ann, were editing, of course.
Awesome.
And I would get off the bus every Tuesday and go get a copy and pore over it. And, as a kid, growing up in the suburbs of Jacksonville, it really felt like a portal to another world, but the other world was my hometown. From that publication, I felt like I learned about so many great local bands that became some of my favorite bands. I learned about bands that were coming to town, and it really opened my eyes to just how much there was going on right here in Northeast Florida. And I had a similar experience listening to a show that was broadcast right here on this station called The Indie Endeavor.
I remember it well.
It would come on at, I want to say 11 o'clock at night on Thursdays.
It was
so
great.
If my parents are listening to this, they're like, you were supposed to be asleep. But I would turn on the radio, tune the dial to 89.9, and sit there with the volume as low as I could get it so my parents didn't know I was awake past my bedtime. And I would sit there with a notebook and just write down all the local bands I was hearing. And it was such a great music discovery practice for me. And I ended up just staying in Jacksonville for my whole life. I've never lived anywhere else. And I really feel like public media had a huge role in that because I learned so early on just how many great things were happening right here in my hometown.
That's cool. It sounds like you were just a sponge musically growing up. When did you start going to shows?
Oh, well, I wasn't really allowed to until I could drive. So maybe like 15 or 16, I would go to shows at Jackrabbits, and there were a few clubs downtown that aren't open anymore. That's how long ago this was. And yeah, I loved going to shows, and I was just such a big music fan. And I'm not a musician myself. I'm more of a music noodler. So I feel like my way of being involved in this medium, this art that I love, is really just as a listener, as a fan.
And how has the scene changed over the time that you've been going to shows and listening to local music?
Oh, it's gotten so much better. I feel like one of the coolest things about staying in your hometown is that you end up meeting people as an adult who have chosen to move here. And it's become less and less. I realized the other day that most of my friends aren't even from Jacksonville. Most of them are from other places, which is such a cool feeling. And the great thing is people move to Jacksonville and bring all the musical knowledge they have from other cities here, and they start bands here. In a lot of cases, they start festivals here. You know, I'm thinking of Glenn Van Dyke and Lena Simon, who run the Winterland Festival that's occurring in February. So there are so many amazing, amazing people just coming here, flocking here, and bringing great music with them.
And so how does that inform the Jack's Music Hour? How do you envision the program, and what is it going to offer listeners?
Yeah, so the Jack's Music Hour is a weekly show, and we play a mix of local music made right here in Northeast Florida, as well as artists who are coming through town. So it's really a great mix to discover local artists who are making music potentially down the street from where you live. You know, it could be in that rattling loud garage down the street. Maybe that's what's going on inside that room, paired with a lot of great national acts who are coming through town. So it's my hope that listeners will hear the show and learn about new bands, and also buy tickets to upcoming shows and go and see and support the arts right here.
Yeah, that's a great way to seed interest, and, you know, a great way for people to know what's coming up, a heads up about things that they may not have known otherwise.
Absolutely. That's my hope.
Yeah. And so what was your first album that you bought? What was your first show that you loved in Jacksonville?
Oh, wow. Well, I think that's a great question. One of the first shows that I really loved was probably a band called Four Families. And I ended up becoming friends with a lot of the folks in the band, but they were just amazing. I saw them play at Jackrabbits when I was a teenager. I was in high school, and it was so incredible because they had a cellist in their band, and the lead singer just had this unbelievable voice that just knocked me to the ground. And I was astonished when I found out that they were a Jacksonville band. I couldn't believe it because they just seemed like they could be from a major city, you know, with the caliber of songs they were playing. And I've had that kind of experience so many times throughout my life here.
And so will bands that, you know, predate the show and older bands from Jacksonville also be on your playlist?
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do. You know, I'm really interested in local venue history, specifically like the history of a place like Einstein A Go-Go's or the Milk Bar. You know, there was a legendary evening in 1990, May 5th, 1990, when both David Bowie and Nirvana were playing shows in Jacksonville on the same night.
Wow.
And so it's my favorite party question, like where would you have been on the evening of May 5th, 1990? So I'm hoping to celebrate that kind of music history because we have such a rich one.
And just give us a sense of what local artists you're excited to play.
Oh, so many. I mean, on the first episode of the show, I played so much music by Bobby Kidd, which is the band of a husband and wife duo, a woman who plays guitar and sings, and her husband who is a drummer. And they write just really gorgeous love songs, but they also have kind of a mental health focus too. And I just absolutely love that about their music. And There's also two bands that come to mind that just have such energetic live performances, and I feel like they brought that same energy to their recordings. Bands like LPT and Love Culture. You know, LPT, I don't even want to call them a band. They're more of like a salsa orchestra. And Love Culture is this great rap collective. So I really want to play, you know, a mix of music and just show the incredible variety.
First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT.